we don't deal with people who have dementia very effectively. We don't deal with very old, frail people very effectively, and we could learn from a lot of other models. There's, for example, a really interesting model that's developing worldwide called dementia villages, which allow people who have severe dementia to live a much more independent life in small group arrangements where they can walk around and they can, they can still be protected so that they're not going to hurt themselves or have an accident if they walk across the street or whatever. So there's a kind of careful design of the outside perimeter of the set, but usually it's a 4-acre or so arrangement where people who have dementia are not just subject to staying inside or in their room or in a institution of some sort.
What do we need to do better or do more? I'm going to name a few things. You let me know. More nursing houses, better nursing houses.
Better.
More affordable living space, private living space for seniors. Revamp or go back and re-enable these existing housing units to be capable of hosting older people, more private ventures that go out and help these people. What exactly do we need?
All of the above.
All of the above.
And for example, one that you mentioned that a lot of people don't know much about is the issue of affordable housing. So we have, a homeless crisis in the United States, and particularly in California. One of the things that it was a new study that came out of the Joint Center at Harvard and MIT about a year ago, saying that by 2050 plus, most of the homeless people are going to be older, over the age of 50, which is kind of shocking and surprising to some people. But obviously, housing is an affordability issue more than anything else. It's an expensive commodity, and everyone needs it to have, a decent life. And those people who are immigrants and people who have moved into, the job market and have never really been able to acquire enough money to have a pension or to have any of the benefits that are associated with that, are the most at risk. And so their predictions are that group of people will now dominate the older homeless or the homeless population in the United States. And it's going to take maybe 20 to 25 years to get there. But as you can imagine, those are people that don't have much money. They haven't saved much. They are also doing hard work. Often it's not sitting at a desk someplace. It's, digging a ditch or doing something that really physically is difficult. And they can't work when they're 75 or 80. They can't do that same kind of work. They physically can't do it. So that's another reason why this particular group of
what options do these people have today?
Well, it's just going to get worse, is what we're saying. Is we're going to find that as housing affordability becomes tighter, so will the choices for this particular cohort of individuals, because they don't have the social benefits through Social Security or pensions or whatever, and don't have the option of working until they're 80, because they don't either have the skills or they don't have the physical ability to do that, to continue the job that they had before, whatever that might have been. So that's one of the four that you mentioned.
Exactly, yeah, that was just scary, to be honest. It's scary to think of it.
And when you start to imagine that 25 years from now, when you look at homeless people, they're going to be older, almost all of them, not drug-addled teenagers, but older people, it's kind of scary. Like, these are not people who had this in mind when they came to the United States. And
you don't want to see them on the streets. It hurts. It hurts seeing a young person on the street, let alone seeing a 50-year-old plus person being homeless. It's just,
that's right.
It's painful.
Right. And the other group that we haven't paid much attention to, and it really is a big issue with the same kind of expansion ratio, are people with dementia. And that's because we haven't been able to deal, we have increased longevity, and with longevity comes the probability that you'll have memory loss of some sort. And we've been working for the last 25 or 30 years on various kinds of surgical and chemical solutions, and we just don't have anything. Almost every medication has some horrible side effect, and so that's going to be a major issue as well. And they're very difficult people to deal with. That's why these dementia villages, to me, are really interesting, because it's one of the more positive ways in which you can take somebody who has real difficulty and give them, the benefit of having choice and being able to lead a normal life, with this impairment, which is awful. What we have decided to do in this country and in Western societies in general is to kind of give up on the people who had dementia. We hope that, maybe we'll come up with something that doesn't have horrible side effects. But the real focus now is on changing lifestyle at age 50, 40, 50, 60. So people can avoid a memory loss as a side effect. And those things like exercise and eating the right food and staying more socially connected to others, those are all really important behaviors. And if we can encourage that with younger people or younger older people, then they may avoid dementia. They may avoid the onset of dementia. So that's really the big push in the U.S. to think about how are we going to deal with this. It's, we just assume people are going to have it, and too bad.
What is the percentage today of people getting dementia at older ages?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't have the answer to that, but I think that, it all depends on how old you are, because the most predictable indicator is age. So if you have people, like I said, your son or daughter who's going to have a 35 or 40% chance of living to 100 is more likely to have those kinds of problems and difficulties. So you could say what goes along with this increase in longevity is also an increase in the number of people with dementia, and it's going to double in probably 20 years. So, and with it, it's expensive. It's expensive to deal with it, whether it's coming out of a public pocket or whether it's coming out of your savings. It's a very, very expensive problem to have. And so that's going to be another issue. How are we going to pay for it? And how are we going to have, the means to do it? Are we going to have people who will be available, who are trained, and will we have robotic devices that are going to do a lot of that for us? Who knows? I mean, if Alphabet has anything to say about it, they're going to invent it and, make it easy to buy, like you would purchase a car. Who knows? But anyhow, those are all things that I think are pretty, pretty dire. And in a way, everybody, you, me, everybody who's living has kind of a stake in it. And even if you don't think about yourself, you're thinking about your kids or your mother or your, uncle or whatever, right? So there are lots of issues that need, closer attention. One thing that you mentioned was the idea of being able to make adjustments to to the dwelling unit that you're in, and also the adjustments, the physical adjustments, the kind of architecture of the place isn't quite as much of a big deal as the service delivery component. And so we can retrofit a unit for people with wheelchairs or whatever, or people who have acute arthritis or whatever. But being able to give them a bath or feed them or help them in various ways is really, really difficult, complicated, and expensive. So that aspect of it is what is making it difficult for us to encourage people to stay in their own homes for a longer period of time. And with that, because one of the three that I talked about was social exchange and social interaction, right?
More expensive than moving to a nursing home.
I'm sorry?
Is it more expensive than moving to a nursing home?
It's about the same.
About the same.
Yeah. And we do encourage, I mean, we provide for the poorest of the poor Medicaid, which does allow them to move into a nursing home, but it won't, even though it costs about the same amount for somebody to stay in their own home, we don't make that available because there would be far more people in the United States that would do that. But if they have to go to a nursing home, and it's a horrible place to go to, and no one wants them to go there, including themselves, it's not as much of a threat financially. So this is a bigger concern because it is something that people want. In fact, that is one of the most important components of these Northern European countries, is that they try and keep people in their own homes as long as they possibly can, because they think it's cheaper, and in the long run, it's what the people want. We have a program called PACE, and PACE ties together home care support and also visitations on a twice weekly basis to like a senior center. It's like a daycare center for older people. And that really helps the social interaction, social connectivity. The problems that older people have generally with healthcare are not acute. You know, they're problems that need to be monitored. And it's not like a once a year visit to the doctor. You have to monitor it really on a weekly or monthly basis. So these settings also monitor the constituents that are going into these settings, and they pay attention to if they've fallen.
So they pay the visit. They send people to their living place and check on them.
Right. They generally have a network of vans that go out in the community and bring people to the setting. They're there for 3 hours or 4 hours, and then they take them home. And that in conjunction with monitoring the home care component of it. And they're doing that for the same cost that a nursing home would charge. So that's also what's interesting about it as well. So to say, gee, it's just as cheap to do this as that, it's possible to do that. There are people who are taking on that challenge through this PACE program. There are about maybe 300 PACE centers throughout the United States.
Wow.
So we do have the beginning of that, but it's not, it's a drop in the bucket in terms of its availability to a broad range of people.
Your latest book, Housing Design for an Increasingly Older Population, focuses on housing for the oldest old.
Right.
That category you've mentioned a couple of times on our session today. What are the key principles behind designing these living spaces for the oldest old?
Well, there are a whole series of different criteria, I guess. One, of course, is to make certain that it's possible for somebody to live in an environment if they have acute arthritis, or if they're in a wheelchair, or if they have some disability that keeps them from being able to do that. So these kinds of changes physically are important as well. And for example, I have a list of 70 things that when I consult with people, I say, here are 70 things you should do in the very beginning if you're going to create housing where you expect people to live until they die. Okay. And most of them add, when they're done in the very beginning, they add very little to the overall cost, maybe 5 to 7% to the overall cost of the unit itself. But it makes it possible to adjust the unit later on when these needs are required and must be dealt with. So we call those, and they're very common in the Netherlands and also these other Northern European countries, apartments for life. And there are probably, I don't know, 300 or 400 of them in those countries where the pledge is move in when you're, let's say, in your 60s or 70s or even 80s, and we will keep you here and support you until you die. Period. It's an apartment for life. And it's done in a very clever way where and normally they need a lot of units together for economies of scale rationale. But maybe if you have 150 units to 200 units that are in several buildings that are adjacent to one another, it could work pretty effectively. But what you would do is people would move into these settings, and then they would be provided home care support based on their needs. So if somebody needed to have, couldn't take a shower on their own, or needed to have somebody at least monitor that if they fell or whatever, or maybe needed to have food delivered to them, or needed to be dressed in the morning because they couldn't do that. Those would all be services that would be provided through this peripatetic force of individuals who are to do this, right?
Yes.
So they would go from one unit to another, and everyone would be living in a, quote, normal unit. A normal unit in the United States for Medicaid is about 450 square feet where two people are living in the same room, okay? These are all units that are one bedroom or one bedroom den accommodations in the range of 675 to maybe 800 square feet. So they're relatively good size units where people can bring their own furniture and they can live a normal life. And it's not like like a hotel room or whatever. So those are really very popular, and they're also really great places because in Europe, they are open to people who are living in the surrounding community. So if you're living in a housing environment across the street from one of these buildings, and you're living in just a normal apartment, you can go to the building for food. You can go to the building for various kinds of activities that are available. They all have a little computer center that's set up as well, so that they can help people. And they have daycare also for people who have especially social problems or dementia. So they're really not just for the people that are living there, although it really makes it possible for them to live an independent life in that setting, but it also reaches out to people in the surrounding neighborhood and it helps them as well. And they have better home care programs in general, so they're monitored in the neighborhood as well through these buildings often. So their whole system, in a way, is centered on the idea of helping everyone, but also in this particular building type, avoiding an institutional placement. You don't have to go to a nursing home. You can die in your unit. And we have hospice care, which makes it possible to make that even now.
And you usually own that unit, or you just lease it?
Well, they have both equity-based kind of condo units that you could purchase, or most, I'd say probably 70% of them are rental, because the rental choices are usually what people make when they make that last move, right? If they're Sometimes they'll buy a house, but more often than not, if they're 70 years old, they're really looking at not something that they're going to be living in for the next, 40 years. Maybe it's going to be the next 10 years